Okay, well, I have 5 o'clock, so let's get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for webinar 3 of the 2021 Routt County Wildfire Mitigation Conference. HOAs and small communities, case studies, and best practices for a fire-adapted community. My name is Carolina Manriquez. I am a forester with the Colorado State Forest Service here in Steamboat Springs, and I'm also acting as secretary for the Routt County Wildfire Mitigation Council. Before we begin, I wanted to take a minute to thank again our organizing committee. This conference has truly been a community effort. We have the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council, Routt County OEM, CNC, CSU Extension, the Steamboat Ski Resort, and the Steamboat Springs Board of Realtors as part of this active organizing committee. I also wanted to take a second to thank our sponsors, the Steamboat Springs Board of Realtors and the Colorado Association of Realtors. Thank you for your engagement and your generous support. A few Zoom housekeeping reminders. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website at routwildfire.org. We are using the Zoom webinar format, so you are automatically muted, and you can communicate with panelists and attendees through the Q&A feature shown at the bottom of your screen. And also, after the presentation today, we will open the floor up for audience questions. And then please, when typing into the Q&A, specify to which panelist you're asking the question. During last week's webinar number 2, we learned about the home ignition zone and also what you can do as an individual homeowner or ranch owner to lower your risk and be better prepared in the face of wildfire. So we're going to quickly review some of those highlights. Dan Beveridge told us that the science shows that embers are the leading cause of home ignition and damage or loss to your home. Todd reminded us that having plans and mitigation efforts in place can help you ensure that you make it through a wildfire event with less damages. Dan also talked about defensive space and how that should be a means for minimizing fire behavior so that the home can essentially defend itself and withstand a fire on its own. The first 5 feet surrounding a home are the most important and should not have any flammable materials present. So that was the whole idea behind hardening your home and making that defensive space be effective. Today, we will scale things up a little bit and learn about the concept of a fire-adapted community and also review a local case study on wildfire mitigation. Let's start by introducing our panelists for our webinar today. Please wave when I name you. Rebecca Samolsky. She is the Executive Director for Fire Adapted Colorado. And we also have with us Chuck Weiskup, the District Fire Chief for the Oak Creek Fire Protection District. So we are beginning our conversation this evening with Rebecca's presentation on the concept of a fire-adapted community and some of the approaches we can take to continue improving our wildfire resiliency here in Routt. Let me tell you just a little bit about Becca. She enjoys working with communities to help them live more safely with wildfire. And as the director of FACO, her focus is on helping to connect the fire-adapted community leaders around the state with the knowledge and support they need to be successful with their communities. And Becca is not FACOing or volunteering for local collaborative, school, or fire department. She enjoys spending time playing, hiking, and gardening near Dolores, Colorado. Again, for more information on our panelists and a list of suggested supporting documents for the themes we will cover today, please look at the webinar's packet that has been posted on our website. Without further ado, Rebecca, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Carolina. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the invitation to speak here with the Routt County Wildfire Council and community. I heard all about the good things that happened in the 2019 summit that you guys organized, and I'm really grateful that I can join you from Dolores, Colorado, from the homelands of the Ute and ancestral Pueblo people, and be able to do this, even though I would love to be there in person and steamboat with everybody. Carolina told you a little bit about Fire Adapted Colorado and our support for the network of professionals like her and others around the state that are helping local neighborhoods and individuals prepare for wildland fires. And my job is to help support them. So thank you for having me here this evening. And Sarah, thanks for helping me with the slides. I'm going to talk more about the concept of fire adapted communities this evening. In this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of what's meant by fire adapted communities. And then we'll focus in a little bit on what everyone can do as residents and as neighborhoods, drawing from an exemplary case study of a community fire adaptation effort here in Southwest Colorado, but with principles that can apply all around. And then I'll invite participants to engage further in community fire adaptation. And it's a great start just by being here this evening or viewing this recording. So fire adapted communities is really a concept. It's not an end goal. It's a key part of our national cohesive wildland fire management strategy. There's this recognized need to help our communities prepare for, respond to, and recover from wildfires. And this piece of helping our wildland urban interface communities live with wildland fires can't be completely separated from our desire to have landscapes that can respond well to wildfire and safe and effective wildland fire response. And what I mean by this in this overlap is that if we don't have homes and neighborhoods and businesses that are prepared for wildfires, our firefighting efforts are more hazardous and less effective. If we don't have neighborhoods and residents who are supportive of the vegetation management projects on neighboring public lands, or who haven't hardened their homes and created defensible space, then it's a lot more challenging to burn some piles or do broadcast burning in near those homes because those landowners aren't as ready. So there really is a cohesive approach, and fire adapted communities at its heart is a concept of what we can do all together to live with wildland fires. Go ahead, Sarah. And on the temporal scale, like I said, it's both planning ahead of wildland fires, responding during, and recovering after fires. And at any given point, your community may be anywhere in the cycle of wildfires happening in your area. And in your recovery efforts, and you have communities that are rebuilding after our devastating extensive wildfire season in the state last year, they can take into account proactive things so that they'll be more prepared for the next wildfires. So I just wanted to kind of get across that temporal scale of adapting to wildfire as well. Go ahead, Sarah. And spatially, we think of communities as a lot of different things. Communities can be our entire county, a municipality, a subdivision, or rural parcels. Can be a community of practice of builders, firefighters, realtors, land use planners. People who like to ride bikes or ski. And go ahead, Sarah, to the next slide. Here's some examples from where you are of all of these different communities that we may think of. And I'm going to focus in a little bit more here, but depending on what hat you are wearing and coming to this with, you represent a lot of different communities. Maybe your neighborhood. The County Wildfire Protection Plan breaks out in different sections at a broader scale geographically. You may live in town or at the edge of town. You may live out more rurally. You may live in a gated community or in a complex where your property is managed by somebody else. And there's opportunities within all of these communities to be more prepared for wildfires. Next slide. And we all have a lot of roles to play in community fire adaptation. So here's just kind of a quick snippet of some of the common industries of people that might engage and bring their expertise to the table with preparing your community for wildfire. I think we often think of those land managers up there represented by the tree, you know, Carolina, who can tell us all about what we need to do to manage our forests better and change the vegetation around our homes to be more prepared for wildfires. But there's a lot of other areas as well. Our business community can help prepare for smoke or for temporary shutdowns because of wildfires, temporary closures because of wildfires, and even helping people get on the cloud so that if anything happens to their business, they don't lose everything or they have their insurance coverage. The local government can create policies that support wildfire resilience. They can fund wildfire resilience. They can do roadside thinning that's going to help out along the county roads. So there's just so many opportunities and so many ways to be involved. But what you can all do is probably just about everyone who's here tonight is a resident that can engage on their own resident level and with your neighbors. So go ahead, next slide. So here's kind of a picture of all of those different things that the different players in the community might engage in. Getting ready for evacuation, recovery from fires, prevention. We talked about public health and smoke and regulations. We've got resident mitigation down there in the, what is that, 8 o'clock. And what I want to point out here is that as a resident, you can be engaged in all of these areas. You might not be the town planner, but you can sit in on a public hearing for new building codes and voice your support for including ignition resistant construction in those codes. Or in the evacuation arena, you can have a go bag packed and you can create an evacuation plan for your household so you're ready for an evacuation. Or you might even plan a neighborhood evacuation drill, and you can do that as a resident without having to be the emergency manager or somebody who's in charge of evacuations where you live. But because this evening my time is limited and I want to make sure we get to questions and we get to the other examples from Chief Wisecup, I'm going to focus in on the actions that are primarily your responsibility as residents. And I know you did some of this last week as well, if you were here participating. So we'll touch on some of that, but also more at the neighborhood scale. Next slide. I believe that the neighborhood scale is really a critical scale to work at for community fire adaptation. And it takes voluntary resident action and organizing to be successful at that neighborhood scale. Next slide. So my first introduction to the concept of fire adapted communities was just thinking about this neighborhood scale and what you needed to do within kind of a geographic area that is likely to burn together, where these people are really in whatever happens together when it comes to wildfire. And when I'm thinking about fire adapted communities at a neighborhood scale, there's these 5 main elements that I'm thinking about. Thinking about the built environment and the home ignition zone that you guys spent more time on last week. Thinking about the defensible space and the vegetation management to make it safer for our emergency responders, firefighters to respond and help protect your homes. I'm thinking about community fuel breaks and community protection. Where can we do a little bit of broader scale vegetation management to help slow the spread of fire into that area or keep it out entirely? Access. Can a fire truck even turn around? Can all of the people who live in a particular area get out of that area in a timely fashion with fire coming? With these one way in, one way out areas that probably many of you live in. And being prepared for evacuations. Evacuation really comes down to the individual and the household and thinking about what you're going to do before you have to do it. Next. So one approach that's been taken for community fire adaptation is called the neighborhood ambassador approach. And this is an approach, so it's not a specific program. It's this idea that as residents, you can volunteer to get your neighborhood engaged in wildfire resilience. And I have seen residents do incredible things because we know that Chief Weisskopf can't do everything. He can't help do drills in every neighborhood, do triage in every neighborhood, on top of running all the calls that they go on every day. So it really is important to have residents who can help with wildfire planning in your neighborhood. Help assess what's going to happen and prioritize and carry out the efforts that you want to see happen to reduce risk at a neighborhood scale, which might be an HOA. It might be more of a self-defined neighborhood, depending on just based on your geography, or a property management association. You can set an example for your neighbors. Oftentimes I've seen places where a resident neighbor to doing fuels mitigation sees how good it looks when somebody does some clearing around their place and decides to get on board and do work themselves. You can create neighborhood contact lists, organize working days, even write grants to do chipper programs or to do larger scale mitigation efforts or to replace roofs that are made up with shake shingles or whatever you may have that's specific to your neighborhood. And residents can leverage a lot of volunteer hours. So if you have a system for tracking, this is definitely a best practice for community fire adaptation, is to have a system for tracking volunteer hours. And those can be leveraged by your local fire department, your state forest service office, by the Routt County Wildfire Council leadership team to help bring in other money for more programs to help you in other neighborhoods. So there isn't really a limit to what you can do as volunteers to prepare your community for wildfire. Next. So I'm going to share with you by way of example, kind of a mix of a case study from the Weber fire in East Canyon in 2012 that's near where I am, that's helped shape what I've seen that communities can do, and mix in some general things that you can do in your community. And I don't know if you can quite see it there, but that home, you'll see some other pictures of this home before mitigation and after mitigation. And this is the home during fire. of a neighborhood ambassador down here in Southwest Colorado who's become a close friend of mine. And you can see that the hillsides painted red behind their place there during that fire. And that came after a tremendous amount of work by their community. So I'm just going to run through what some of this work was and the kind of work that you can do in your place. Next. So they started by, go ahead, next, Sarah. When they found out that they were at very high, they were one of the highest risk areas with the circle around them on the county wildfire protection plan, they said, oh my gosh, I think maybe we should do something here in our community. And they started working on a wildfire protection plan and started encouraging residents to work on their own defensible space. Go ahead, go back one so folks can see those pictures of the houses too. Sorry, Sarah. It's okay if we miss those, but that defensible space is really there. You could see the house a minute ago, the fire behind it. Here it is when it had pretty heavy fuel right up to the house. Right below that is the thin vegetation around the house. And then another neighboring home where they'd done defensible space work. And there's the fire truck parked right in that driveway as well during this fire. So many homes had done a lot of work. They also recognized, and this was 10 years ago, so home ignition zone wasn't as popular of a recognized thing with those embers lighting homes on fires. But they had figured that out and had done a lot of home hardening work as well. So here's just some examples of some ignition resistant construction techniques. And I'll show you a few more of those in just a minute. I also wanted to point out here, this is another fire that I was on a couple of years ago, and I just loved this walkway. Completely stopped the fire. That was pretty much on its own, that fire burning in the grass that had been cut. You can see how effective those hardscapes can be in changing the fire dynamics. Next, I'll show you a few more ideas of ways to do some hardscaping to set an example in your neighborhood. And all of these fine little details really do make such a big difference. Whether it's cleaning out the gutters, sealing up those kind of strange features on our houses where you have embers that could collect along the bottom edge of the log roof. Here they put in a metal flashing so that you couldn't have embers right up against that gap. That 3 to 5 foot non-combustible barrier around the house. There's lots of ways to do that. I would recommend if you're going to put in gravel, make sure that you put in some good weed barrier beneath that, because yeah, those weeds and grasses will definitely come up in the gravel, and people often choose gravel because it's easy to do. Just make sure you get a good barrier down. And then I love this fence, redone fence that somebody did where they put in a metal section right up along the house to come into the house so that they wouldn't have the wooden combustible fence leading all the way to the house. Really cool job of somebody using steel to kind of blend in and look like the wall. So I don't, or look like the wood. I don't know if Daniel Beveridge may have shared some pretty cool pictures with you last week as well, but just some examples of what you can do really at your residential scale. Next. But getting more to the neighborhood and what East Canyon was able to do, they knew they were a one-way in, one-way out location. And when the residents were visiting with responders in the process of building that initial community wildfire protection plan, their fire department said, we're not going to send people down there if there's a fire. There's way too heavy a fuel along way too much of your road, and this is going to be a lawn chair fire. We're just going to have to sit up here on the highway and wait for it to burn through and catch it at the next road in the valley over. And that was a pretty serious assessment. And it may be the case for some of the places where some of you live. It's not worth anybody's life to save homes. So our first, as responders, our first effort is to get you out of there. But we have time, fortunately, with wildfires, we can prepare in advance and change those dynamics. And so this community devised an incentive program for residents where they were able to get some grant money at that time through the State Forest Service, but they also decided to put in HOA funding so that a resident's match to do thinning in that 100 to 150 foot stretch along their roadway would be only 25% of the total cost. And so through that, incentivizing and laying out that plan, they were able to treat over 2 miles of roadway. Next. And here's some pretty cool pictures too that I'll share with you. Go ahead, Sarah. From their Fuel Bre work. Oh, sorry, I skipped you too far. They were able to, I just think these are pretty cool, how nice it can still look. And this really is probably a different landscape than some of what you have. This is really a challenging intermix of ponderosa pine, pinyon juniper. But I just love this first series of before mitigation, after mitigation, and then after the East Canyon fire burned through photos through some of their shaded Fuel Bre work in that neighborhood. And that work really made the difference when responders came in to be able to come into the community. And because there had been so much pre-planning work and interaction between responders in the neighborhood, they knew and recognized that hard work in the community and were able to basically draw the fire line from the shaded Fuel Bre in around people's defensible spaces and hold that fire to the side of the road that 3 years prior the same fire department was saying we won't send anybody down there. So that was a pretty fantastic outcome. So I guess I'll just hold it at that slide for a little bit to tell you a little bit more about this idea of the way this happened is from residents who said, we want to do something. And a couple of them took the lead and formed a little bit of a committee and started working on an evaluation of what needed to be done in their community. Their initial wildfire protection plan was only about 15 pages long max and had a handful of things to do. And all of these things that I've just run through are the things they said they were going to do. They were able to carry them out at that neighborhood level and have since been tested by 2 wildfires. We had another one there just last year that started on the green side, and they didn't lose any structures and were able to evacuate really quickly and safely. So this approach is one that I've been helping to support all around the state and around the country, because this isn't something that you should do alone as a resident. This is something that also takes support of your local partners. So the state forestry can help you come up with the vegetation management plans. Fire department can help assess your access and your structure vulnerability and let you know whether and how they can respond and what their resources are in the community. Landscapers and extension can help you figure out the best fire resistant plants to plant in your area. And so at that level, it's a broader community effort to support that neighborhood action. Go ahead, Sarah, next. So I just want to put in a plug that this year at the Colorado Wildland Fire Conference, we're going to have a On the front end, we're going to have a workshop on September 20th and 21st that's on building your fire adapted communities neighborhood ambassador approach. And so if this is something where we want to help Routt County to be able to help neighborhoods approach wildfire risk at that neighborhood scale, that a small team of folks could come, go through that training, and build a plan to support residents where you're at in your county. There's a number of efforts all around the state and country that are doing this. It ties really closely, many of you may be aware, FireWise programs, NFPA's FireWise USA. And so this is one step, instead of being a program, this is a way to say, how do we support at a local level with our local efforts, our neighborhood ambassadors, our neighborhood leaders, because this is really place-based work and it works differently no matter where you live. And beyond that, I invite anybody who would like to join us in Grand Junction for the Colorado Wildland Fire Conference. And there will be a lot more details coming out on that next week as well, as our registration opens up. Next slide. Just to kind of wrap up here, I hope that you can see a little bit how residents can engage in a lot of ways around community wildfire risk reduction. So once you've taken that approach of working on your house, becoming more prepared where you live for wildfires, think about what more can you do? This bubble here, don't ask yourself whether you've done enough mitigation, always be asking yourself what more you can do, comes from my friend who owned that home that I showed you earlier, that had the slurry drop right behind it. And Philip Walters is always did what he could at his place, but then goes above and beyond to reach out throughout his neighborhood and the broader community to support wildfire risk reduction. And so big Smokey Bear hugs to all of those folks who want to engage at your neighborhood level and do the work around your homes to prepare for wildfires. Very much appreciated all the work that you do. And Sarah, you can go to my closing slide, and I thank you all and look forward to your questions. And I will we'll make sure to drop my contact information if you have other questions as well in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that wonderful presentation. Creating fire-adapted communities means working from the front door to the forest, and that involves everyone. We are now going to hear from Chief Weisskopf about the work he has been doing for the last decade to reduce wildfire risk in his fire protection district. Let me tell you a little bit about Chuck. I know most of you must know life. Remains an active leader in the community. He was a volunteer firefighter for 20 years at the Oak Creek Fire Protection District and has now served as their district fire chief for the last 18 years. Before this position, he spent 20 years as the Oak Creek Public Works Director. And Chuck's other community involvements includes having served on several community boards and commissions, having owned an outfitting business for 10 years, and currently being the mayor pro tempore for the town of Oak Creek. So, Chief Weisskopf, please go ahead. Tell us about your efforts.
Okay, first slide. Thank you. Thank you guys, everybody that's attended. We had a good turnout at this conference last year with everything that's went on this year. This is tough, but I'm glad to see that it's still taking off. This picture here is the Morrison Creek Fire, May 16th, 2000, 21 years ago next week. this is the fire that really got our attention in Routt County. We had never really had what we call this as a running crown fire. At this point, the fire districts really didn't have any formal wildland training. I mean, there were times we were still out there fighting, grass fires, sagebrush fires, and bunker gear. And like I say, this is the one that really got our attention. This was 99 was a pretty good fire year. 2000 shaped up with even more. And that's about the time we said we really need to learn more about this wildland fire stuff. This was up Morrison Creek. It was about a 94, 96 acre fire, numerous structures threatened, and had all kinds of involvement from the locals, Forest Service, BLM, State Forest Service. Unfortunately, we're this year in the same conditions that we seen 21 years ago. Last year, as you all know, our fall was real dry, but the magnitude of the fires has dramatically increased. And so this is a good time to be discussing this stuff. But this was the one that really got our attention. In 2000, let me get my, after this fire, the fire chiefs got together in Routt County with some of our federal and state partners, and we really started looking at fire. And we were tasked with about 6 questions of what could we do in the county. Obviously, we didn't have enough people to respond for these kinds of fires. At this point, other than Steamboat, all of the fire districts were still volunteer fire departments. So in August of 2000, and that was after this fire, the fire chiefs, emergency management, like I say, some of our federal partners from Forest Service, BLM got together and done an evaluation of just what we had in Routt County and what we could do facing these kind of fires. And we formed what was then called the Routt County Wildland Fire Group. And it was the chiefs, and it later became the Routt County Wildland MAC Group, the Multi-Agency Coordination Group. And we've been meeting up until this last year. We were meeting at times monthly and at least quarterly. And now with the formation of the Routt County All Hazards group, that MAC group has kind of went away. But part of what happened was we looked at Routt County as a whole, and we realized that we didn't have enough resources, manpower or equipment to handle fires like this. And what happened, especially on this fire here, it was real prevalent. When I put out a page for mutual aid, I had roughly 70 firefighters and 30 pieces of equipment on this fire within the first hour and a half, 2 hours. Basically emptied out the county. And, like Rebecca said, we still have other calls that we all have to answer too. So that really got our attention, and we sat down and we met for numerous months. We was meeting once a month and evaluated emergency services as a whole, but wildland in particular. And what we found out was the biggest thing we didn't have was enough personnel. So we actually proposed a program to the Routt County commissioners. It's one I'd actually heard about. I attended a mitigation conference in Colorado Springs not too long after this fire, just so I could learn more about it. And there was a fire district that had hired a summer crew, and they'd done mitigation work, and ended up, it paid for itself. And they hired 3 people the first year and bought a truck. Same thing the second year, third year, to where they had 9 people with 3 engines working mitigation, and they was also available for initial attack within Boulder County. And that's kind of what we proposed to the commissioners based on that idea. And it was about $1.7 million back in 2000. I don't know what that would equate to today, but it's probably substantially more. And the county commissioners and the fire districts, they really just didn't have the funding for that. But that's one of the things that program stuck in the back of my mind. And along about, 2008, 2009, I think Carolina was part of it. Carolina, I'm not even sure when you came, but you've been a part of a lot of this. I found out that the Stagecoach Property Owners Association had got a mitigation grant, and they had purchased a chipper and a wood splitter. And come to find out what they had done, they was kind of taking it upon their own, and individual homeowners could, check out the wood splitter and the chipper if they was clearing trees on their property. And then we got a little bit involved in that in the beginning because we had a community that was very active. They actually located a large open area where this community could, trim their brush, cut back stuff. No, not big trees, but mainly just brush. And the community has a lot of oak brush, serviceberry, and chokecherry. And we got together and partnered up where they could take that and pile it. And I'm talking a pile. I never dreamed we'd see a pile like we did. I just didn't know the enthusiasm was there. And it was the size of probably a 1,500 square foot house when we went up there, and then we'd go burn it. And so then that kind of spawned, really got the interest going. And in February of 2007, the community, State Forest Service, we had help from Forest Service, BLM. We started looking at a community wildfire protection plan for Stagecoach. I'll have a slide here in a little bit that kind of shows you the Stagecoach area. It's about 20 square miles. It's platted for about 2,200 units out there. And right now there's probably around 500. And it's right dead in the middle of what they call the red zone out there. And like I say, this fire really got our attention. So when I found out about the mitigation grant, I followed up on it. And in 2010, we was able to apply for our first grant. And it was a learning experience. We got the grant, we started out small and we hired a crew and we worked them to death. We was able to apply again in 2012 and be successful. Next slide, please. So when I hired the crew, this was my view looking from Lynx Pass down through the Morrison Creek Valley and Stagecoach. After we had this fire out there in 2000, then what we had the beetle kill. And I mean, this was throughout the valley, throughout the subdivisions out there. We went through and identified areas, critical infrastructure, watersheds, and I had a good inventory of the homes out in that area, and those all got identified in the CWPP. But this was scary to me. Especially after that fire we had. If we'd have had that with the beetle kill, it could have been a really big magnitude fire. We started off with, next slide, please. Sorry, next one, we'll go back to this one. Got them in the wrong order. All right, next one. There we go. So we started off with public education. We got this crew hired. The guy there in the cowboy hat, he was my crew leader. I started him a month early. He went out, he met with homeowners associations, property owners association, just a little individual group homes that may be out there. Actually made the contacts for this kind of work. We had to do liability release so we could get on the property and that kind of stuff. And that's where we started. We got word out through the Stagecoach Property Owner Association annual meetings, and the program really took off. And part of it was due to the fact that I had at least 2 people who were actually members of my fire board and property owners at Stagecoach, and in some form or fashion involved with the Stagecoach Property Owner Association. So we had really good buy-in and a lot of knowledgeable people. Go back 2 slides, please. So as we reached out, we done 9, and this is over a period of 2 years, 2010 and 2012. We've done 9 public outreach and education events. We do Labor Day, Taste of South Routt, any event where it drew a large number of people, we do public outreach. From those outreach, then we would get the names of people who were interested in getting assessment, either for mitigation itself or just home hardening. We'd look at their gutters, we'd look at their decks, we'd look at their firewood piles, propane. All of us had Wildland Urban Interface 215 training, so we knew what to look for and how to guide people on that. And like I say, this thing really took off. Go back 1 slide, please. Nope. Okay. Forward. So this area here, you can see Stagecoach Reservoir there, and you can see the areas that have been harvested in thinning, mastication, and prescribed burns. This is the areas that, following our CWPP, include our partners with State Forest Service. I know there was a couple of big projects they've done up there. The U.S. Forest Service has done a lot of boundary work, and then the work that we've done. And I'm real pleased with the work that's been done out there over the years. There's still a lot to do, but I'm a lot more comfortable than I was with it prior to these projects being done. Back one, please. So as this thing took off, we had at least 350 piles that we burned. Between us and the Stagecoach Property Owner Association with our 2 mitigation projects, and I'm not sure how many they had, but in the 2012 one, they had actually, I believe, got a grant. They hired a logger to come in with a processing machine, and they was hauling off basically anything they could turn into even firewood, they was hauling off. So as they took those down, they would leave piles that then my crew come along later and burned. So that's part of that 350 piles, 188,000 cubic feet of slash. I mean, that's a lot. It's really a lot. I'll show you some pictures of it here. We also partnered up with them to use their chipper, and it had been used quite a bit. So our use of it was minimal, just because they take a lot of maintenance and a lot of upkeep, and it was kind of entering the end of its life. But we did chip up 400 cubic yards. So that's 40 of these dump truck loads that you see going through town hauling gravel. 40 of those trucks, and most of it, some of it we broadcast. We also put it out for free for people to come and take, put in their flower beds and that kind of thing. Because you have to be careful. That many yards, and if you're doing a large area, if you just chip it and broadcast it on the floor of the forest, basically all you're doing is creating another fuel type. And those chips can sit there, and they just kind of smolder and burn for a long time. While the other thing we done, if you're familiar with the Stagecoach area, Stagecoach was platted in the 1970s. A lot of the roads were put in and stuff, but then they went bankrupt. So along those roads, we had a lot of what we call volunteer lodgepole pine coming up. And you'll see some pictures here. Some of them were, 20 feet tall, and they closed in the roads, and it was too dangerous to even send firefighters back in there if there was a fire coming through. So that was one of our things we identified in not only in the CWPP, but in our initial mitigation plan. So we cleared, and basically all we done was we cleared on the road side of the bar ditch, the drainage ditch. But even with that, we done 13 acres. And some of it, we could get 10 feet into the property. Along with this, when Stagecoach Property Owners was doing theirs, they went in and they cleared out 60-foot road right-of-ways. I believe they had either a 10 or 15-foot trail easement on the front of every lot out there. And then they'd put out a notification that if you didn't opt out, they was going to reach into your property, however far that processor would reach. And I want to say it was about 35 feet, and pull out any dead trees. So we ended up some really, really good fire breaks up there. The other thing we done, I'll show you pictures of it here. We wanted to make sure we done this right. And we had a section of County Road 16 that was a real bottleneck where the forest kind of come up on both sides. It was grown up to the shoulders of the road, and it was a weak spot where a fire on either side of the road could easily have gotten across. And it was the only place like that where it was real easy. So while that logger was out there for the Stagecoach project, we actually paid out of our pocket, out of the fire district budget, to go ahead and get that road cleared, just so we had that much more of a safety zone through there. And I'll show you the difference it made here. While we've done a lot of individual homes, the bulk of the project took place in the Morningside subdivision. Consists of 183 lots and totals 177 acres. Most of the lots out there are roughly a quarter acre, give or take. And there were times, you'll see pictures here, we were clearing upwards of 75 trees off of a 1/4 acre lot. It gives you some kind of idea of what we had out there. Next slide, please. Okay, so that, like I say, that one shows, and I'm sorry, Caroline, I wasn't going to put the whole one up here. I'm mainly concentrating on the Stagecoach area so we can see what we've done down here. Next slide. Next. So this is one of the homes prior to mitigation out there, and you can just, I mean, you can see the beetle kill, and these are big trees. When I hired my crew, I made sure that there was going to be a good job done, and I told them, I said, I want these lots and these properties left like it was your house. And so you'll see here some of the jobs they've done. Next slide, please. You know, a lot of trees to come down, a lot of them right next to the house, had some really skilled people. Now this is during the project. Next slide. They took what I said to heart. These are piles. They actually took leaf rakes and they raked up all of the little twigs and stuff. Even though it wasn't a manicured lawn, it was just a grassy area. You know, they raked it up and cleaned it all up. And kind of at the bottom of the picture there, you can see. We was able to do all of this free to the homeowners. The way the grant worked, there was some costs, some hard costs that the district absorbed. We had some soft costs that we matched with our equipment. And the other thing we generated was cords and cords and cords of firewood that then we opened up to the community. And I still get people calling me wanting to know 10 years later if we have any firewood available. Next slide, please. So here they are. This is where they've raked everything up. This one just happened to be on the driveway. You know, they get in there, burn those little piles even. Next slide. This is a picture of that house. The trees you can see in the back there are on an adjoining lot, which we done later on, but this is an after picture of that house after the mitigation. Next slide. This is another, so this is the one on the back side of those lots. We actually got permission from these homeowners. This is prior, this is when we just starting the mitigation. Next slide. We still have a few piles there to burn, but you can see the difference. And while it looks different, you know, part of it we can't help. Part of the problem was these forests were so thick. A lot of these trees grew up very spindly and didn't have the strength. And we actually ended up for several years later doing some more mitigation work. Some of those trees just weren't strong enough to hold up to the winds that came through there. So the homeowners would be, you know, they get blown down, the homeowners would be cutting them up, using the firewood, and then we'd go out and burn the piles. Next slide, please. This is another one just up the road prior to mitigation. Next slide. And there's a picture of it after. Next slide. Back up to that one, please. So you can actually see here along the driveway, this guy, you know, he said, hey, I'd like some of them chips to put along the edge of my lawn and my driveway there. And so, you know, we utilized them wherever we could. Town of Oak Creek, you have a picture here with the chips getting blown into the back of a dump truck. They come in and come out and actually hauled in loads of dump truck that they then made available to people here in town. Next slide. And next. So this started off being our area where we'd haul, if we didn't have a good area to burn the slash, then we would haul it all to a nice open field that was common area for Stagecoach Property Owner Association. Next slide. And this is a picture of burning. I don't know how many times we burned that pile. However, it did lead to Stagecoach Property Owner Association now uses the same area, and they allow people to, you know, that are doing their own mitigation, they allow them to haul their slash up there throughout the summer. And then there's years that we burn it. There's years that they have a contractor that they pay to come and burn it if I don't have personnel available. And that first picture was actually a little smaller than the first one we done, just kind of when we started our mitigation. Next slide. So here we got the chipper. Like I say, there we was actually probably had somebody that was going to come in and pick up a bunch of those chips and haul them off. Next slide. And here's the one I was talking about where we're actually chipping into the back of the dump truck and they'd haul them off for use somewhere else. Next slide. Here's a combination of a area where we'd done a pile. We had an area there we could actually burn the pile, and then you can see the firewood that was gathered up and left there for free for people. And obviously, if you look at the trees in the background, we was only partially done on this lot here. Next slide. So then I talked about the road clearing, and this is some of the stuff we generated. And this is where the chipping came in a lot, because all this green stuff, it's really hard. You got to let it lay for 6 months, 8 months, something like that, at least before you're able to burn it. So we went in there, like I say, we took it off anywhere next to the road, on the road side of the bar ditch. And you'll see some pictures here, how this initially looked and how we got it opened up. Next slide, please. There we go. So you can see how ingrown, and this is one of the better ones. There was some where it was actually, the trees were actually growing up as far in to the gravel as where that truck and that chipper is parked. Next slide. So that's just a picture. I actually caught it with the tree falling when he was cutting from the picture before. Next slide. And there's what it looked like when we got done. I mean, it really widened that up, made it safer egress for people that may live back there, and safer ingress for the firefighters to get in and fight the fire. Next slide. This is the area I talked about on County Road 16, and we had to jump through some hoops to be able to work into County Road right away, but in the end, it all worked out. This area here, you can see how it's grown in, but if you look over on the side of the screen, you can also see all those dead trees over there. And we got called out there numerous times every year for trees falling into that power line and arcing and causing fires down in the grass. Next slide. So this is as the processor's going through. Next slide. And you can see how we got that cleared out. It made a big difference. Next slide. Or is that was the last one. Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
I just wanted to add one other thing. So this has all led to, with the recession and everything, our budget dropped drastically. We was able to get a mill levy increase past this last year. And one of the things that we've done for 2021, they've just started this week, is we've hired a 7-person mitigation crew. They're out working right now, and they will also be available for wildland firefighting, not only within the county, but our plan and to help pay for this crew. We will be sending them out nationwide. We kind of done some of that last year. So moving right along. It's a good way to leave my district. I'm retiring probably end of August and leaving them a good product.
Yes, Chief, your leadership has really accomplished a lot in these last 20 years in very creative ways and new models for us to emulate in other HOAs. Now I'm going to pass this on to Sarah, who is going to help us with the Q&A.
Thanks, Carolina. And we've had some great questions come in. I will direct questions to a specific person when I can, but there might be some that I just open it up to all of you. One question, there's been some discussion about fire-wise and fire-adapted. And Rebecca, I think this is a question for you. Can you tell us the difference between fire-wise and fire-adapted communities?
Yeah, sure. So FireWise USA is a program of the National Fire Protection Association, and that is very much a packaged recognition program that you're doing something in your neighborhood that comes with expectations of having a neighborhood firewise committee, a certain amount of investment from your community for the year, and reporting, having an assessment done, and a set of goals for that, whatever defined neighborhood or community you're using for that Firewise USA recognition, and having at least one event per year. So there's kind of these minimum standards to say you're recognized for being a Firewise site. And there's a huge amount of them. Like I think we're up to close to two. I'm not going to get the numbers right nationally. I think there's a lot. Fire adapted communities is a concept. It's something you never get to. I did give examples of a couple of situations where, you know, when you have better outcomes from a fire, you say, wow, that's some good examples of fire adaptation. And so fire adapted communities is much more of a broad concept. You can't be a fire adapted community, but you can ever be working towards being more adapted.
Got it. Great. And that leads me to my next question, which is, what steps do we need to take to become a fire adapted community? How does that work? How do you start that process? I think that's always the hard questions. How do you get started?
Well, you guys have already started in a lot of ways, and the chief just gave some great examples of some local programs toward being more adapted to wildfires. So if you remember some of like that FAC wheel that I shared of all of the different things that you can do, and that those are just examples. It's really about the coming together. Having the wildfire council is a huge advantage in your area. To figure out, what do we need? What do you guys need to be more prepared for wildfire? What are your big risks? Chief did a great job of sharing some of those, showing some of the beetle kill, showing some of the challenging road access issues that you have. But there may be other things too, in terms of like, for you, Sarah, with it, looking at the economic values and the ski resort there and protecting that huge aspect of the community. Your watersheds, and you guys are a headwaters area. So it can be a lot broader than just the neighborhood scale that I talked about a lot. And then I think, you know, that neighborhood scale is very important too. So diving in and figuring out what programs can we develop that are going to help homeowners. I did see a question in the chat about that as well. What programs can you guys create that'll help homeowners, whether it's a 7-person fuels mitigation crew that has, you know, certain parameters of what they can do, a program that helps with hardening, places to get rid of that slash, whether it's being used or being burned safely. All of those things, it's really challenging for one neighborhood or one individual homeowner to deal with themselves. But by having the partners in place around your community to help figure out what those needs are of individual residents, of a lot of individual residents, then you can build programs that work in your local place.
Thank you. We had a couple of people ask about how you get, whether it's a neighboring homeowner or neighboring neighborhood. You know, one HOA does the work that they need, but the next door neighbors or the next HOA isn't. How do you work with that? How do you motivate those folks to do the work? Carolina, yeah. That might be you, Carolina. You might have some input too, or Chuck too, as how you guys stage coach.
That engagement part is one of our key challenges, and I'll let Chief talk a little bit about that.
You know, the public outreach and education programs that we attended had a big part. And, you know, mitigation kind of has a stigma attached to it where, you know, you're going to cut down the trees and it's going to be ugly. And we actually had several places where we'd go in, and that's why insisted that my guys do such a good job, because, you know, we may have a neighbor that he wasn't interested, or well, maybe. And as soon as they seen what it could actually end up like, we got that buy-in. You know, and unfortunately, the biggest buy-in usually happens when there's smoke in the air and fire on the ground. And I think with the magnitude of fires we saw last year, we're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in on this one too. The never letting a fire go to waste thing, unfortunately, is a reality, and people were breathing a lot of smoke last year, and so there will be a little bit of increased motivation. I imagine you also have a lot of residents who maybe aren't full-time, or landowners who aren't necessarily full-time residents, and so that may be some of what you're feeling or sensing with the neighboring subdivision, or even neighbors directly. But don't give up on those folks. You're not going to get, everybody's not going to be an early adopter. So, and I did want to leave you with that hopeful message. I kind of skipped it in my presentation, but every little step is really important and really valuable. And so celebrate those things that you are able to accomplish in your community, and don't expect that everybody is going to get on the bandwagon right away. A lot of social science research that I've seen where residents have been reached out to has shown that most people believe that they are doing something to reduce their risk. They've done something, even if you can't see that as a neighbor. So the trick there is to create that connection and figure out, how do we get them to do more of the things that are going to be impactful, and not just, you know, whatever was convenient for them at the time. So like Chief mentioned, having that incentive program, all that work that got done for free to residents, that's incredible. But is that scalable to your entire community? Can we really expect that everybody in Routt County who needs to do wildfire mitigation work is going to not have to pay anything, put any skin in the game to get that work done? Probably not. So how can you start leveraging each other's work to get more work done in the communities? And then the other thing, as far as the neighborhood to neighborhood approach, that's part of the ambassador strategy that I was sharing, is that sometimes it's really helpful if you hear from another resident what they did in their neighborhood. It feels a lot more, it can feel a lot more tangible when you see that, oh, well, they created a slash pile place in their neighborhood. And that's something we could do too. We have a place where we could burn in our community. So just finding those little things from one neighborhood to another neighborhood that might work, without starting with the like, oh my gosh, it looks like they've done nothing. But who is that full-time resident that you also happen to see at the rec center, or every time you go skiing, that you're like, hey, I think we live near you, and you should come see what we did for wildfire mitigation in our place. Maybe your HOA can do something. Maybe your HOA should invite somebody from the Routt County Wildfire Council to come speak at your meeting this year. That's how those efforts tend to get started in a community, is when some formal or informal event is happening, and you get started and you say, as the Wildfire Council, here's your opportunities in your neighborhood. We want to do work on the adjacent Forest Service land, the neighboring subdivisions doing work. We have this mitigation team that can help with work in your community, and that gives them a place to grasp on and get started.
Great. Chief Weisskopf, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did. Back during the time when we was doing our mitigation, and it didn't count because we was doing it for free, but at that time the state had some tax incentives and tax breaks for people that done mitigation. And that kind of went away. And from what I've seen, I believe there's a bill going through right now. After the fires last year, there's quite a bit of wildland money that the governor's trying to put forth. And I believe that is back in that bill again this year.
Great, thank you.
So the credit is still there. There's a $2,500 tax credit for mitigation work. So we can post that on the routwildfire.org website, the specific information, but that still exists.
Carolina, while I have you on, a couple of questions about who do I contact to assess a condo complex or a neighborhood about the risk and what the potential concerns are in terms of access or egress. Can you talk about that a little bit, and maybe also talk about possible funding and grant opportunities?
Yeah, those are all great questions. I would suggest to reach out to your fire district if you're going to talk about your home structure and the hardening of the home. And you can also contact us, the State Forest Service, to talk about HIZ or defensible space and strategies on how to engage with your HOA and your neighbors to do some of this work. So fire districts, you know, Steamboat Fire District, North Routt Fire District, South Routt Fire District, West Side Fire District. So we have several fire districts. Some are volunteer, some are paid and have more resources. So Steamboat, Oak Creek have more resources available to them. In terms of grants and potential funds available to do some of this work, go to the Colorado State Forest Service website. Under resources for landowners, you'll find every grant that's currently available. Not only through us, there's a database that links you to other resources available. Again, if you send an email to that info@wildfire.org that Maddie just posted, we can get some of these questions answered.
Thank you. It looks like Susie Romick has her hand up. Susie, I'm going to allow you to talk if you want to ask your question.
Nope, no question.
Okay.
Great job tonight.
Thank you. I'm gonna, if it's okay, I want to talk through just quickly about what I did in my home with my homeowners association as an example. So I'm on the board of my homeowners association, and what we did is we used our common areas as a way to show people how they could do the work. So we held a meeting, we told everybody, well, first we actually had the State Forest Service come in and do an assessment of our neighborhood by parcel and identify potential risks, including our common areas. And then we had put out an RFP and had a contractor who was going to do the work. We set up a call with our whole neighborhood, and we had Carolina speak, and we had the contractor who was doing the work speak about the work. And then we put out to our whole neighborhood when he was going to be there and gave everybody his contact information. So they could potentially schedule work on their property or have an assessment when he was out to look at and do that work. And we had 5 homeowners take that opportunity when we were having work done on our common areas to have him assess, and they got work done on their lots. So it's part of that kind of what Rebecca was talking about, kind of that using an example and people see how good it can be. And it kind of dispels that belief of like, oh, everything's going to look terrible. And then they're already scheduled, they're already in the neighborhood. We didn't even have a grant. We didn't have any grants. We didn't do anything like that, but just from that educating the neighborhood and scheduling that time, it kind of motivated people to do it. And we're going to do it again this summer. Same exact thing, have another common area work done and have a Zoom meeting so everybody can ask questions and potentially schedule their work at the same time. So just on a small neighborhood scale, what you can do as a neighborhood working together. Okay, we have
great.
another.
Oh,
sorry.
There was a hard one in there, and maybe you were going to pull it up, but to do with the vacant lots. Can I address that?
Yes, I would love it. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, a couple questions about vacant lots, and especially if it's affecting your insurance. That's a really hard one. And if you have a homeowners association, that could be a helpful tool, because then you can set up a mechanism where you can say, look, some thinning needs to be done. It's affecting insurance. And if you don't do it, we're going to do it for you, and we can assess you a fee. And that's all within HOA and HOA's ability within state regulations to set that kind of a thing. So I highly recommend, if you're in a homeowners association and the landowner will not voluntarily do some work or let you do some work, because they may just say, hey, you know, if that's, oh, I'm sorry, it's affecting your insurance, we just can't get out there, feel free to cut down what you need to. And that there may be some lighter handed things than having to give, you know, come down with them from the HOA. But those are some opportunities within your HOAs to set regulations around thinning work that should be done, or to even create incentives that will help those vacant landowners do the work.
Great, thank you. And Chief Weisskopf, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, and we was kind of walking a thin line on it when we done it, but there was actually a section in the fire code that does not allow accumulation of combustible materials on vacant property. And you know, how far we could have went and pushed it, I don't know, but we did use that to get some people's attention and get them to do some work.
Great. We had one question about aspens versus pine, and what is maybe more, you know, in terms of flammability or risk. Caroline, you want to take that one?
Yeah, real quick, because it's 6:15. So real quick, your pines are going to burn hotter and faster than aspens. And so again, CSFS website, there's a lot of information on vegetation types and what can be done specifically for each one of our native vegetation types. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending this evening's event, and especially to our panelists and our partners. As we've seen, everyone in the community is in this together, and we must recognize that the wildfire problem requires a new approach. Fire is a big problem, but as Rebecca said, there's hope. There's hope in these synergies that we're creating within our county and in our Northwest area. We're working together with our neighboring counties. You know, so whether you're a homeowner, it's the fire department, your local governments, the nonprofit groups like the council that we formed here in Routt, your local and federal, state land managers, we are all part of the same wildland fire community. And we have shared interests in healthy landscapes, economies, and citizens. So become involved, stay involved. We need you. We need you to help us work this problem as together, and together become, become and remain a fire adapted community. We have to do this in partnership. So again, thank you so much for attending this evening's event. Please let your friends know that these webinars are being recorded and that you can access this information again. We need to spread the word. I also wanted to invite you to our last webinar that is happening next week. The last webinar of this conference will be on community lessons learned that have to do with preparedness and recovery. So thank you so much again. Hope to see you all next week. And thank you, Chief Weisskopf and Rebecca. Wonderful, wonderful webinar this evening. Thank you so much.
Well, I just want to thank